The Ministry of Timelines bears no official responsibility for the content of this research. The extensive use of mercenary companies in this timeline must not be ignored, as it has clearly decided the balance of power on many occasions. Further research into the applications of mercenary contracting is advised. Civil war gripped the Hegemony of Belbos. A dozen candidates vied for the Imperial throne. Across a dozen Imperial worlds, brothers fought brothers, each secure in their righteousness, knowing that their candidate was the true candidate. Trade dried up. Transport ceased. A civilization that had stood unaging for millennia collapsed. Humanity, who had been bound by imperial shackles for almost 200 years, was once more adrift and alone. The newly christened Free Human Republic rose from these embers. With war surrounding this fledgling nation, the Free Human Republic was thrust straight into an economic crisis. You see, the hegemony had been a single, interconnected economy, each world reliant on every other. So with the complete collapse of the hegemony and the cessation of interstellar commerce, humanity's economy ground to a halt. Production chains were broken. Crucial raw materials did not arrive. Buyers for human exports evaporated overnight. Without even firing a single shot inside human territory, the Belbos Civil War pushed humanity to the brink. Their close neighbours, the Razak's Imperial estate, fared much better. They had spent a long time preparing for the collapse of Belbos. For the plebeians, the study of market forces and dynamics was the most important branch of scientific research. Generations had been spent refining and improving their predictive models, until one day, the greatest mind that Razak's society had ever produced, Leo Regal, predicted the fall of Belbos. His mathematics precisely tracked the movement of the masses, and he could hear the stuttering heartbeat of Belbos 1,000 years before it failed. With the arrival of the Civil War in 2243, the Razak's Imperial estate rebranded, and health, happiness, and hedonism was born. As if war and economic disaster in the same year were not enough for the Free Human Republic, it was at this time that they made first contact with the Harappan Empire, thanks to the meddling of foreign neuter diplomats. This first contact shook humanity more than any before, for the Harappan Empire was not a state of alien entities, but a nation of humans. The lost Indus Valley civilization was no longer lost. Instead, they had reappeared on a harsh, frozen world half a galaxy away. Interest and obsession with the history of the Indus Valley and history in general reached new heights in the Free Human Republic. Due to the great distances involved, a physical first contact between the Harappan Empire and the Free Human Republic was not possible. And with the near-human six-fingered corpses on Hasara in the forefront of their minds, the Earth's diplomats were very keen to establish the lineage of the Harappans. This, however, proved difficult. First, the Harappan diplomats wore traditional dress. This included thick, warm clothing and, importantly, thick mittens. The number of digits on their hands was thus totally obscured. Secondly, translational issues plagued the humans. The Harappan language shared a great deal of ancestry with modern human languages, but its unique differences kept leading to stumbles during these first meetings. In the Harappan language, you see there is no word for finger or thumb, but instead only the word for digit. This meant that when the Earth diplomats asked, in a fit of pique, "Just tell us how many fingers you have," and the Harappans answered 5, a confusing situation unfolded. Questions regarding the translation were required. But is a finger a thumb, or is a thumb a finger? Around and around the diplomats went, spiralling into nonsense. One Harappan, shocking their counterparts, finally removed their mitten to show a perfectly normal human hand, and put an end to the linguistic debates. But how had the Harappan people ended up on their cold, dark home? They themselves had no answers to give, only the whispers of myths and legends. In 2246, the benevolent interstellar flock made diplomatic contact with the Free Human Republic. The Inak research satrapy, like their siblings on Earth and Razax, had thrown off the yoke of imperial oppression, and a new nation had been born. With this re-establishment of communications, rumours of the so-called ultra-human humans reached Earth. Living on the human cage in Bronterok space, it was reported that these humans had been surgically altered to host a variety of cybernetic implants. The Republic Senate was sickened. In an attempt to improve relations and curtail the threat of military conflict, a Bronterok embassy was established on Earth, and an independent commission of observers was sent to observe the human prison world. Had the Bronterok really mutilated the humans living in their nation? In 2247, President Charlotte Foster declared a national day of celebration, Prosperity Day. Critics argued that Prosperity Day was a mockery of the current economic situation, as the Free Human Republic edged closer and closer to total economic collapse. We have a recording of one media broadcast covering this event.
Despite what many are claiming to be the economic collapse of the Republic and scattered reports of starvation on the outer colonies, the President today formally announced a new national holiday, Prosperity Day, stating that everything is just so great now, oh yeah, the sunlit uplands of freedom.
On the other side of the galaxy, across the Gulf of Space, the constructors of Mecane became the latest civilization to fall under the sway of the Nuta archivists. Whilst on the surface, the subjugation of a third civilization should be a shocking event, many argued that the constructors were not sapient, and in fact, they were not really even sentient. This grouping of rogue machines was simply a tool being placed firmly back inside the toolbox. Critics argued that the Nuta authority was growing too rapidly, unchecked, across that region of the galaxy. From a human perspective, the Nuta had an unhealthy obsession with the past. Even though humanity was, at this time, wrapped up in their own little quest for knowledge thanks to the Harappans. Deep under the surface, humans were envious that the Nuta could have such a detailed record of their history. They were, quite understandably, very distrustful of any long-lived empires that ruled over other nations or peoples. In 2250, the Republic signed an incredible deal with the HHH. They gave away a handful of cargo freighters filled with alloys in exchange for a full bailout of the Terran economy. There were rumours of the health, happiness and hedonism negotiator responsible for this agreement retiring to a life of lavish luxury within the Republic immediately thereafter. Yet the Republic media reported these rumours as being entirely unfounded. Even though the public rejoiced, Earth's leadership was acutely aware that the HHH bailout was only a temporary reprieve. Leading human economists reported that the Republic was in a death spiral. Without hegemony trade, it would be unable to support a society at this advanced technological level. Elements of the Admiralty, thinking outside the box, proposed the addition of new worlds and resources, specifically from the antagonistic Telforth Empire. Their proposals of conquest were the only concrete solutions provided to a private Senate committee tasked with saving the Republic's economy. Technological fairy tales, such as the creation of self-sufficient orbital habitats, were also presented, but the Navy experts branded them as entirely unfeasible in the current timeframe. The one solution that would not lead to a weaker Republic in this time of uncertainty was the Navy's. Publicly, Admiral Guy Gagney led the calls for war, claiming that the Montu should be freed in the name of Fred Phillips. After the official declaration of war, he took command of the Periclean expedition. Battle was joined by the Telforth around Torfrey's Star. As had happened decades before, the Navy routed the Telforth. This time, it was a Christmas victory. 2 more years of fighting, and human victories gave way to peace. The great Telforth Empire surrendered their right to Othana and the surrounding systems. The Free Human Republic acquired the new planet's resources and people that the Economist required. The Montu were freed from slavery and given full citizenship rights within the Free Human Republic in the name of the martyr Fred Phillips. The territory of the Free Human Republic now extended all the way out to the galactic rim. 2254 was a year of tragedy for the FHR. The first elected president died in office. Though her death was entirely unsuspicious in nature, she died of old age. Rumours abound that she was, in fact, assassinated. With the loss of the president, a motion of no confidence in the ruling Human Advancement Front was pushed through the Senate, forcing an election. Admiral Guy Gagney, hero of the people and father of the Republic, won the election in an unforeseen landslide vote. He was also the leader of the Church of Belbos. This political party and religious organisation believed that humanity's future must be to follow in the example of Belbos, to become overlords, parents, to use the parent protocols, regarded by the Church as holy texts, and then rule the galaxy. The firm hand of parental guidance must be applied. And with this policy in place, the Free Human Republic took in the Savasic satrapy as a client state. There was outrage in the Senate. Had humanity learned nothing from their history, that we would so blindly become Belbos? By 2256, Guy had become an incredibly divisive president. On Savasic II, Guy Gagney ordered the establishment of a human garrison. The Senate and public at large were shocked to see human forces occupying former Belbos garrisons on former Belbos satrapies. Even inside the Church of Belbos, moderate elements did not want the Republic to become Belbos. After 2 years of turmoil in the Senate, which led to economic, political, and societal stagnation, and with many convinced the new Republic was on the cusp of collapse, the Senate chose to give emergency powers to the Admiralty in order to break the deadlock in the government, which had all but ground to a halt. This period further cemented the power of the Admiralty and their position as the bulwark of democracy. For the average citizen, life improved. One of the first acts by the Admiralty with their new power was to sign a free trade agreement with health, happiness, and hedonism, and enter their customs union. Business boomed for both nations. In 2260, 2 senators were then arrested under charges of treason by the Admiralty. The Delegated Powers Act, granting the Admiralty the right to suspend trial, expired before the sentencing date, meaning that a full Senate hearing was required. Before the Senate could meet to conduct this trial, Guy Gagney intervened. A presidential veto was used to protect the 2 senators, Max Still and Ed Braith, around whom conspiracy swirls for the rest of their political careers. In order to limit the powers of the presidency, strict controls on his power were implemented by the Senate. This change was made at many levels of the political system. Levels of bureaucracy were thrown up to impede the more extreme aims of the Church of Belbos. Forms, it was argued, are the final proof that the pen is mightier than the sword, as forms, not weapons, were now the safeguard of democracy. The bureaucracy expanded to meet the needs of the ever-expanding bureaucracy. President Gagney was barred from making any major policy changes to the Republic. With these sweeping reforms, his office became more of a figurehead than the original balanced power that Guy had intended and first held in 2243, when the Republic was formed. In the 2264 election, Guy Gagny was re-elected with a hairline majority. Calls of electoral tampering were rampant across the Republic. Prior to the election, his adversaries had assumed he stood no chance at winning. They then ignored him and allowed him to claim victory, as their votes were then split. The Senate responded to Guy's victory by establishing multiple commissions to investigate and safeguard future elections. Along with these commissions, they instigated strict new policies on voter identification. This further inhibited the effective functioning of human democracy. 2 years later, the Free Human Republic was again at war with the Great Telforth Empire. Amongst the public of the Republic, it was called Guy's War. The President, the Church of Belbos, and their health, happiness and hedonism backers had declared a preemptive war on the Telforth Empire. Over a decade of peace was thrown away in an attempt to bring the Telforth into line, following the strictures of the parent protocols. For 3 years, the Navy dawdled around the external systems of the Telforth Empire, with no real military engagements. Sick of the indecisiveness, the President pushed for the Navy to invade the core Telforth system, Valen. Only a few weeks after the Valen campaign began, the invasion ended in a crushing defeat for humanity. In the largest military disaster in human history, 2 fleets were repulsed by Telforth forces. The Admiralty intelligence and insistence of the President to begin the attack led to a vast underestimation of the enemy fleets. Fully 1/3 of the Navy's ships were wrecked in Valen, with the rest requiring extensive repairs before they could be put back into the fight. In the haste of their retreat, the Navy also failed to defend their army counterparts. Army transports were destroyed en masse by the Telforth forces. Reports from the battle are hard to piece together, but it does appear that the Navy sounded the retreat. However, there was a monumental miscommunication. The army were then caught in the crossfire between the retreating Navy ships and the Telforth advance. Only 1 in 6 troop transports managed to escape the system, with a death toll for the brief campaign estimated at 1.4 million humans. Those lives lost in just 2 weeks. It was the largest military blunder in human history. In 2270, the investigation of the human prison world, renamed Earth 2.1, came to a conclusion. The Bronterock had implanted cybernetic constructs into the human beings living there. Initial outrage at the appalling alien experimentation on humans dissolved as it became clear that this was done in strict compliance with the Bronterock legal code. Fair punishment in their society was to be a laboratory subject, to advance science and give back to their society. On top of that, remaining humans on the once dubbed human prison world now worked in law enforcement, and a burgeoning merchant class had emerged, with a high level of social welfare. There were even calls for societal reform within the human republic, so that all humans could enjoy the living standards of those living under the Bronterock. Around this time, a fascination with alien cultures began to take deep root in human society. Brought in by cybernetic humans from Inac space, the ritual of bathing in a cocktail of mutagenic chemicals exploded as a fad on human worlds. For unaltered humans, the health effect of these mutagenics were very, very bad. Due to a bureaucratic mistake, the human government decreed that all public swimming areas, showers, and other bathing locations should become mutagenic spas. This increased HHH profits enormously, as they were the primary supplier of the imported chemicals from Inac. Form 32EB1-C was issued instead of Form 32EB1-B, a quick switch made by a well-placed plebel within the human administration. This was a case of active espionage that led to disaster for the lives of ordinary people. In 2272, intel reached the Navy that the Harappan Empire was not a single lonely planet lost in the depths of space. Their numbers were in fact in the trillions. The Free Human Republic confronted the Empire, who were rather cagey to corroborate any details of the Empire's space. Until this point, Earth's assumption had been that over time the Harappan Empire would be subsumed by the Republic as it expanded naturally. A diplomatic game of cat and mouse ensued. The Harappans were shocked when they discovered what had been done to Earth since their exile thousands of years ago. Foundries, strip mines, and the wheels of industry had poisoned the garden. We have an excerpt of the speech given by the Harappan Empire when disseminating news of this catastrophe to his people.
Brothers and sisters, I stand before you today with terrible news. You may have heard that our long search for the garden is over. We have found the lost jewel out there in the deep darkness. Our celestial surveyors have spent weeks authenticating the validity of this data before I bring it to you now. It cannot be disputed. These are just a few of the images we have recorded, and as you can see, it isn't what we thought. There's been no apocalyptic war, no terraforming event. It is our cousins, our wayward cousins, who were supposed to protect the garden, this Earth, and keep her safe. They have failed. The skin of this world has been split to harvest the precious ores below. Her skies have been corrupted by 1,000 industrial byproducts. The very water, the water is now poisoned. I vow to you, noble people of the Empire, we will not rest until the garden is restored, no matter the cost.
A trade dispute between the Igarian Consortium and Health, Happiness and Hedonism descended into an all-out war in 2275. HHH claimed that the Consortium, a splinter faction of the Hegemony of Belbos, were a criminal syndicate, with a plebal chairman, and with human mercenaries leading their armed forces. The Consortium struck deep into HHH space. Health, Happiness and Hedonism fleets were entirely routed above Wenkworth, the closest planet to the old Imperial capital. This gave the Consortium access to the protected shipping routes of HHH. This was the start of a period of decades of intermittent warfare within their territory. The space lanes were burning. The human navy, meanwhile, was on the other side of human space, still fighting in Guy's War, and thanks to a border dispute, unable to reinforce the beleaguered plebals. By placating the local Belbos warlords, human fleets then were able to converge on the besieged capital star system Hran Hep Homan. In 2279, the navies of the Free Human Republic and Health, Happiness and Hedonism launched a coordinated assault on the besiegers of Hran Hep Homan. They achieved an overwhelming victory in the Battle of HHH, smashing the Consortium mercenaries. 1 year later, in 2280, Carlos Velasco, leader of the National Defense Party and the victorious admiral of the Battle of HHH, ousted President Gagny. The militarists were now in control. However, this did little to help the political apparatus of the Republic. It then only intensified the deadlock in the now spiritualist-controlled parliament. Former President Guy Gagny died in 2282. His supporters claim he was assassinated. However, each faction had their own theory as to who the assassin was. Admiral Guy Gagny allegedly passed away due to old age, but true believers refused to believe the lies. Naval intelligence then used this opportunity to launch a disinformation campaign, suggesting that Belbos were responsible for this death. This further added to the chaos within the Church of Belbos in the wake of their leader's demise. Former President and Admiral Guy Gagny the father of the Free Human Republic was given a full state funeral on Earth. Millions attended. Billions viewed the proceedings from across the Republic. In 2284, to counter the anti-human operations of the Church of Belbos-led Parliament, President Velasco began to implement additional levels of bureaucracy in an attempt to obfuscate any real decision-making power the Parliament possessed. He was able to do this supported by recent advantages in AI research from naval intelligence. This allowed the presidency to continue to navigate their increasingly complex system of checks and measures. Before human forces could occupy the consortium's capital and put an end to this criminal syndicate once and for all, in 2286, an HHH backroom peace deal was agreed to let commerce flow freely once more and put an end to the devastation wrecking HHH territory. This prevented the Republic's navy from legally continuing with their invasion plans. Unfortunately, the consortium had no such qualms. Consortium raids and conflict continued in the HHH. Hardly peace in our time. In 2270, President Velasco's campaign to sideline Parliament reached its apotheosis. Form KDGHKX-023463Q, which could only be ratified by a majority of the Parliament, required that Parliament must have prior approval from Parliament to sit in session. But as the requirement for this form was implemented in an interim period, the Parliament was unable to sit. They were caught in an effective catch-22. This then sidelined the Church of Belbos faction, who had dominated parliamentary politics for the last decade. The election of 2290 was also then postponed by President Velasco on a technicality, as the election mandate required approval from a sitting parliament. With these changes, a new electoral cycle was codified, but that would not start for another 10 years until the end of the century. During this period, the unfortunate use of mutagenic chemicals was entirely phased out from human space, but in its place a culture of hedonistic sloth had grown like a fungus. Personal hygiene remained taboo, for if you didn't shower, you smelled bad, but if you showered in the chemicals, well, your epidermis would tend to fall off. By 2291, having centralized power, President Velasco launched a preemptive strike against the still fractured Hegemony of Belbos, out of fear that, should the hegemony manage to reunify, they would then represent the single greatest threat to human sovereignty in the local region. Like the conflict against the consortium, HHH's border defences were swept aside in the opening stages of the war, once more plunging their economy into turmoil. 2 years into this war, at the Second Battle of Hrannhep-Homan, humanity suffered a stunning defeat. All naval forces were routed by the Imperial Armada. At this point, the mood in the Human War Office was despondent. Many began brushing up on their knowledge of the parent protocols in anticipation of a hegemony victory. But only a year later, in 2294, the Navy, assisted by health, happiness and hedonism negotiators, managed to acquire the contracts of a mercenary group that had until now been pledged to the Belbos. Their term of service lapsed for a period of only a few days, but that was enough of an opening for the ruthless HHH. With this fleet now stationed above Hrannhep-Homan, this effectively returned control of the system to the Free Human Republic and her allies. In a bloodless coup d'etat, FHR reclaimed HHH space over the next 3 years in a series of brutal engagements. Planets were set ablaze. Civilian lives were extinguished with little remorse, thrown heedlessly into the meat grinder. Many in the Navy did not believe that their so-called victories would have been possible without the support of the Belbos mercenaries, whose bloodlust and wanton disregard for life had caused insane levels of collateral damage all across health, happiness and hedonism's space. Eventually, by 2296, the fighting moved over from the HHH territory and for the first time crossed into Belbos space. By the end of the year, having breached the Belbos defences, the Navy had begun an assault on the ancient Imperial capital. For 2 years, the largest ground battle in human history was fought for the capital of the Hegemony. The bulk of the fighting was done by plebeian mercenaries, not by human soldiers. As the invasion ground on and began to turn into a stalemate, the Admiralty decreed that orbital weapons should be employed to break the will of the Belbos defenders. This did not achieve the desired goal. Instead, it further strengthened Imperial resolve. In 2298, Navy intelligence received a strange communique from the Bronterop. These files detailed the Harappan relocation project, for Harappan civilization on Old Earth had been deemed a failure by the Belbos. Too peaceful. And instead of pronouncing the entire project a failure, they decided to relocate the Harappan to a distant world with a harsh climate. The hope was that both they and the humans on Earth would become the warrior caste the Belbos required. The Bronterop files also included shocking details of HHH involvement in this ancient conspiracy. They were responsible for supplying the parts used in the transport vessels, which, coincidentally, were known to be faulty. Which, coincidentally, the Razaks knew to be generally faulty. It wasn't until 2299 that the last Belbos outpost on the old capital surrendered. Belbos had fallen. With the fall of the old Imperial capital, more information about the Harappan relocation program began to come to light, and the reason for the abandonment. Unfortunately for the Harappans, they were left in the cold dark of their new home due to a mistake in the Belbos bureaucracy. Paperwork was misfiled and then lost. This left that group of humans entirely adrift in space. With the occupation of Belbos, the previous loyalists from the fractured Church of Belbos then reformed as the Church of the Martyr. In Fred's name, we trust. In 2300, on the turn of the century, the Earth received an official visit from the Harappan Emperor. The Emperor demanded that the Earth be turned over to the Empire, that all industrial work on the planet should cease immediately. The Free Human Republic refused. This was the start of a catastrophic breakdown in human-human relations. The Harappan Emperor was asked to leave, and reminded to fill in his paperwork correctly if he ever wanted to come back to Earth. He did vow to return, to fix the garden, paperwork or not. This concludes our analysis of the human fight for freedom from Belbos in this timeline. Please refer to the next chapter of this report for further details on the Belbos timeline.